This episode of the ResortLoop.com podcast is brought to you by Joffrey's Coffee and Tea Company. Joffrey's is proud to be the official specialty coffee of Disney. Enjoy drinks and pastries at Joffrey's kiosks throughout the parks and check out the Disney Specialty Coffee Collection only at Joffreys.com.
Hi, Listener Nation. It's Courtney Combs calling live from Disney Springs to wish Tim and Bob, or is it Bob and Tim, a happy quad centennial, whether or not that's a word. Bye-bye centennial? I don't know. 400 episodes. Congrats, guys. Sadly, I have listened to them all. I don't know what that says about me. Lots of love. Bye.
Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.
Please board quickly and safely. Our monorail will be departing momentarily. Thank you.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm Tim Scott.
I'm Bob Collar.
This is ResortLoop.com. This is another big number for us. This is episode 300.
303 years, Tim, and I don't think we could have a bigger show for Looper Nation today. This is, we are just so thrilled to have with us some big names in Hollywood and in the entertainment business. These guys, before we get started, I got to tell you, this documentary that we're going to talk about, it won awards at the San Francisco International Film Festival, at the Melbourne International Film Festival, and it is one of the most beautifully written, beautifully directed, produced documentaries I have ever seen in my life. Brought me to tears at least 3 different times. We are thrilled to welcome the producers and directors of The Boys, the Sherman Brothers Story, actually the Sherman cousins, Jeff and Gregg Sherman. Guys, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Well, thanks for having us and for all those lovely words about the film and our dads.
Yes, we appreciate them all, and we appreciate the fact that it resonates with people outside of people with the last name Sherman.
Absolutely. I mean, it is just such an incredible. If anybody out there in Looper Nation has not seen this film yet, you got to see it. It's available on Amazon and other places, but just such a great documentary on, of course, the Sherman brothers,
right?
Richard and Robert, but also the Disney company as a whole. So you really want to check that out. But guys, how did the making of the film even happen? I mean, how did you guys come together to make this film?
It's a long process, but basically, Jeff and I, as we set out in the premise of the film, we grew up really not knowing each other, and it was a little known fact that our dads did not socialize whatsoever. And when we say that, that means I never set foot in my cousin Jeff's house, and they lived 7 blocks away. They never set foot in our house. Whenever there would be a Sherman Brothers event, and growing up, there were 50 motion pictures, thousands of different songs, and who knows how many times that we would have been in the same room. We were just kind of told, at least on my end, it's better this way, just wave hello, and they're there. We knew they existed. We just didn't have any connection to them whatsoever.
We got the same thing on our side. This is Jeff talking. And, it was always mysterious to us. And Greg and I knew each other to wave. We really never hung out. It was just sort of this strange wall that existed. But when we were older, we both went to the opening of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in London, the stage version. And we, as always, the norm for us was we walked in, and my family, the Bob Shermans, were seated at one side of the balcony, and the Dick Shermans were seated at the other side of the balcony.
Well, it wasn't the balcony; it was the Royal Circle. And
okay.
When you're in London, I'm just saying, it was opening night, and it was pretty cool. And I was seated in front of Harvey Weinstein and next to Andrew Lloyd Webber. So
wow. This
was actually some good seats. But the point is that we were seated on opposite sides of this Royal Circle. And at the end of the performance, the orchestra turned to our dads, who were again seated on opposite sides, and asked them to stand up for this standing ovation. And they each took a bow and looked to each other and gave each other a little hand signal. And when Jeff and I got to the after party, which was amazing, by the way, the Broccolis know how to throw a party. Little known fact, just in case your listeners don't know this, Ian Fleming, who wrote all the James Bond books, had a son who felt kind of slighted by the fact that he spent so much time working on the James Bond stuff. And he said, I think you love James Bond more than you love me. And his dad set out to write one children's book, which was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And
so Cubby Broccoli owned that among all the, he bought all the Ian Fleming books, and he came to our dad's right after Disney had, well, I guess Disney had still was alive.
He gave them permission.
He gave them permission to get out of their contract long enough to do the Chitty movie, which was wonderful. But anyway, so we're at this after party, and I saw Gregg, and now I'm an adult, and I'm there on my own, and I just walked over to him and I said, do you know what happened with our families? And he said, I'm so glad you asked me. And we sat down, and for the first time in our entire lives, really, we sat down and talked for literally hours. We were the last people at the party.
It was a good party. And we ended up continuing the conversation back in Los Angeles, where we both live. And that led to us thinking about doing something along the lines of a biopic and doing something about our dads. Because what we both felt was that our dads had very different viewpoints in the world, but no one really knew who they were. They could sing, dozens of their songs, but no one actually connected them with the immense body of work.
And our dads are getting older. My dad, it was only a few years before he passed that we made the movie. And we just kind of wanted to record them and get them on film while they were still able to talk for themselves. And really, when you watch The Boys, the Sherman Brothers story, I would say 2/3 of it is just our dads speaking, in their own way, on opposite sides of the planet. When we recorded, my dad was in England and Dick was in Beverly Hills. And but they tell the same stories and come at them slightly differently, which was really fun for us when we were cutting it together. People always go, wow, I forget that they're not sitting in the same room when I watch the movie.
And you can see the shorthand of having worked as partners and as brothers and as tunesmiths for so long, that you could see how they got to various points of really interesting melodies and lyrics because of their varying viewpoints. It was fascinating to watch this happen for us.
So we got together and we started doing this as a biopic, and every place we went, including Disney, as a matter of fact, they said, we didn't really know the Sherman Brothers. They hadn't really even heard of them, but everybody knew their songs, as Gregg said. So we decided to do this thing, but we couldn't find anything. Well, Roy Disney, the late Roy Disney, had seen the film, and so had Tom Schumacher, who's the head of Disney Theatrical.
Oh, you're getting ahead. There's one really interesting thing that we did.
Okay.
And it was Jeff's idea, actually. We were sitting at Art's Deli in Los Angeles. It was one of the better delis. And it was now, years had passed, and the opening of Mary Poppins was going to happen in New York City. It had opened in London, but now it was going to open in New York. And Jeff and I were just having lunch, and we realized our dads hadn't spoken the whole time from like 2002 to 2006. They hadn't spoken at all. That they had really kind of reached a point where they were living their own lives. And we realized that the opening of Mary Poppins might want to be one of the last times they actually see each other, which turned out to be true. And Jeff said, why don't we just roll camera on them both days and just see what we get and interview a few people?
So we hired 2 camera crews, one following my father, one following Gregg's dad. And you see that in the film. Where our story ends is really where we began in the documentary.
But we self-funded this. We just decided we'd cash advance credit cards and hit up a couple of our close friends and relatives, not our family, but other people, for money to just seed money to show what it would be like if we actually did this as a feature film.
So we created a 25-minute piece just based on the interviews we've got around the opening of Poppins, and also a few back here in town, some key people really. And we showed that to a few people. We showed it to Roy Disney and to Tom Schumacher, who's the head of Disney Theatrical in New York. And they both called Dick Cook, who was the head of the studio, and I got a call at home. And it was Dick Cook's assistant. She said, "We hold for Dick Cook." And he said, "Yeah, I hear you got something great. Can you come in tomorrow with your cousin and show it to me?" So we brought the 25-minute film up to his private screening room up in the Team Disney building. And it was a little intense because it was really, this movie could be made only by Disney because the bulk of their work was done there. And as the lights were going down, I said, if we're going to make this, we have to do it here. And he goes, "Oh, I'm well aware." And we watched him for the guy could watch him. He was sat down right next to me in this sort of big screening room. and I was a little intimidated, but I watched him, and I saw him wipe a little tear away from his eye as the lights were coming up, and he said, "Boys, why don't you come in tomorrow? We'll make this as a documentary." And we looked at each other. We wanted to say, but we wanted to do a biofilm, but we went, okay, we'll do the documentary. And that's how it became, that's how it was set into motion.
Wow.
And the next day we sat with every head of every department. It was crazy. And we had full support. One attorney, it was funny, you know, our dads wrote, how many, 500 songs at least for Disney Studios. And one attorney in the group said, well, guys, all you can have is 12 songs. You know? We have 100 here and 1,000 published songs, plus the ones that you don't know about. And there was another guy who was Mitch Lieb, who is this wonderful guy at Disney in the music department. He's the head of Hollywood Records, and I'm not sure what else. But he came aside to us. He said, guys, your dad and uncle built the Walt Disney music department. You can have as many songs in this as you want. So we have 160 songs or so in the movie.
There was a lot of pushback, you know, as we went through the process. There were a lot of people and there were a lot of rules at Disney Studios, and we got to violate a few of them. A couple of, among the two that stand out to me, one is showing Walt Disney and showing the likeness of Walt Disney. We had Diane Disney and her husband, Ron Miller, giving us all kinds of wonderful footage and stills and things that had never been seen before, and all the rights that we could have to be able to show Walt as a three-dimensional human being. And the other one, as a side note, was that there was an executive who said, well, you can't show people smoking. We don't show people smoking in Disney movies.
Our dads smoked pipes and cigars and cigarettes the entire time. They wrote every picture they had, and you know, and Disney pictures and everybody. It was
and
funny.
As did Walt. Walt was a big smoker too.
Right.
That was just what people did in the 50s and 60s. And so we said, it's a documentary and we're going to do this. And so once we kind of bypassed him and went over his head to get what we needed, we added three-dimensional smoke and shots and had things going through smoke. We had cigarettes everywhere.
The great thing was it edged us up, though, because the smoking images got us a PG-13 rating on this documentary. So.
Really?
Is that what did it?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. You know, Tim picked that out. He said, did you notice the smoke?
I did. I was going to bring that up later. Those stills, the work you did with those is amazing.
Yeah, there were just a couple of shots where we just decided, hey, by the way, yes, we are going to have cigarettes in this film. Not that either of us smoked, just that it was reflective of what we were doing, an honest documentary.
We had our graphic artist do a couple of mock-ups for us with them taking the cigarettes out of the hands, and you just wonder why they're holding their hand up that way without a cigarette. It just looked stupid.
Right.
Right. Sure.
Excellent. How long did it take to make this documentary, between all the research and everything you had to do until final release?
All our lives, plus about 4 years of on and off.
Yeah, 4 years of production, but we had started talking because we were going to do the biopic, as we mentioned, and we talked to both our dads endlessly, probably for 3 years prior to that.
Right.
And came up with a full kind of a narrative story, a way of telling their individual stories and their things as a scripted movie like Ray or, you know, something like that.
And then we actually had an extra year after that where we took all our footage, and some of it didn't fit the narrative of our storyline, but it was still compelling and interesting stuff, especially to Disney fans. And so that was so lovely. Bob Iger personally gave us a budget so that we could spend a year and make these wonderful little bonus features, which ended up running about an hour's worth on the DVD, that are for real Disney fans and real fans of their music, that just show the process and show their differences and show all kinds of interesting things about the park.
Yeah, there's a great section on the theme parks. And just because if you go to the theme parks, when Greg and I go, we always laugh because I hear my dad's and uncle's music everywhere I walk in that park. It's just everywhere.
It's a great feeling. I mean, things that you wouldn't think about, songs off of different, not as successful pictures, but songs that fit perfectly as you're walking down Main Street or going into different places on the carousel and everything. It's just lovely. It's a great feeling, you know.
Absolutely.
It has to be awesome.
Yeah. That's, you know, I said that this film brought me to tears at least 3 times. I've seen it over a half dozen times now, and every time it brings a tear to your eye. You said the Disney executive, he had a tear in his eye. How emotional was it for you guys to produce this film?
Well, it should be said, we are both emotional people. So we definitely ran the gamut of emotions, to elation, to unhappiness, to tears of joy, to tears of frustration, because we were dealing with doing something that was on a grand scale, and we knew nothing we'd ever do in our careers would ever be more personal, and we had to get it right. And every aspect of it we had to get right. And because we were working together for the first time and telling a half of a story that we weren't as intimately familiar, it led to a lot of frustration and a lot of joy. I mean, as I always say to Jeff, the greatest thing for me to come out of doing this film was I really didn't know my uncle very well. And I got to know him not so much by the interviews we did, but because I'd be out in London and I'd spend days and we'd go to dinners and I'd sit in his apartment and we'd talk. And I really felt like that was the most treasured thing I could take from this. And it was extremely emotional and extremely gratifying.
I knew Dick a little bit because mostly, it's interesting, I spent a lot of time in my dad and uncle's office growing up because I love music. I'm a composer myself and love to hear all the things, and I'd play stuff for Dick. And I knew him there. I knew him when I was a little kid. We were really close. I have lots of pictures to prove it. But after I was about 5 or 6 years old, we didn't really see him very much at all, except at social events. And then it wasn't a close thing. So I had the same experience. But I think what was really interesting for me and for Gregg was we got to interview people that knew our dads throughout various periods of their life. So most people know their parents as sort of like an older person that's a father or mother figure. And we got to see our dads as boys. You know, we interviewed Sam Goldwyn Jr., who the late wonderful man, Sam Goldwyn Jr., and he had been my dad's best friend and grew up with little Dick kind of annoying them in the house. And we got, we got the sense of them as like three-dimensional characters. So that was wonderful. And I really got to ask my dad, and I know Gregg did too, things that, would be uncomfortable outside of about these things. What were the problems? What were the best parts of these, of their relationships? With each other, with their writing partner, brother, and it was fascinating just to do that. So, and then there's the other thing which is wonderful. We traveled a bit with the film after it was done, and it went to several film festivals, as you mentioned. One of them was in Annecy, France, and Gregg and I went out there, and it was a sort of a mix-up because they asked us to have it dubbed into French. Or into subtitles, and Disney accidentally shipped the wrong one without the subtitles, so there was a delay. We got all the way out to France for this film festival, and there was such a delay. They were looking for another print, and they couldn't find it, so they just put that one up, which didn't bother anyone. They all, they knew the songs, and most of them spoke English anyway.
Sure.
But it sort of killed our time to have a Q&A, and afterward, everybody was really disappointed to the point where they surrounded us. There were a couple hundred people from all over the world at this international festival asking us questions, having us sign international copies of the films. And I looked at Gregg, and we both thought it looked like It's a Small World had come to life. It was it created this thing. It was very emotional. It was lovely.
Sure.
What was also fascinating, too, is that we would go to different film festivals, and that one was an exception just because there was a delay and it didn't happen the way it usually did, which was we'd show the film, we'd talk, we'd do a little Q&A, we'd something along the lines of what we're doing now. And then after the movie and after the Q&A, people would queue up no matter where we were because they wanted to relate to us their personal story of their family and their disconnect and their dysfunction. And that was the strangest, most interesting and somewhat gratifying thing, because Jeff and I sat in a dark room editing this thing for years and years and years thinking, isn't our family strange that we grew up so close yet so far apart? And so many people needed to tell us, like my mom and her sister, and I want to show this to them. And this became like a cautionary tale for people. And we did not expect that. That was like a really interesting perk and benefit for us. And that was emotional as well, because we're able to do some good because, although we did set out with two goals, one of which was to connect our dads to their work. The other one was to try and bridge the gap between them. But I think it was a little too late for us on that front. So it's an emotional journey for us.
You know, the truth of it is, you know, because sometimes people go, oh, they hated each other. They didn't really hate each other.
No.
They just lived different lives. They had been so locked up in a room together that they needed to kind of get out and do things. But there was this disconnect. They deeply loved each other. Like if you said anything about the other one, they would, you know, they'd attack you. They adored each other, but they just didn't really have much to do with each other as time went on.
Right. And in the documentary, when you know, Jeff, your dad talks about being in World War II, and then Greg, your dad says how the gap between them was only 2 years, but after he came back, it was almost 20 years.
That's true.
That does change people, and I'm sure their outlook on life was a little bit different too. So
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, he gone and seen the darkest parts of the war. He was fighting in Germany, liberated Dachau concentration camp, and being a Jewish man and seeing that, it turned him internal and you know, made him really look for things. And a lot of people, you know, now we call it post-traumatic stress or whatever. And I'm sure he had it. He used to have those nightmares and all that. And Dick didn't have that experience. Dick was in the military, but he was stationed in California and just didn't have, you know, and that is enough to really, you know, drive a big divide between the two.
I think they always had that divide personality-wise. And I think that a lot of times it's a whole nature versus nurture thing. And I think Bob, my uncle, who sought out going to World War II, who as a 17-year-old wanted to go and have that experience and felt the need to fight for our country and everything, and got special dispensation to be able to go out there, wanted to have that. Whereas my dad would run away from anything remotely close to that, and has successfully, for the last 87, almost 88 years, done a very good job of running away from any kind of conflict. So, you know, I feel like that they were destined to have these very different ways of looking at it.
But the cool thing is our grandfather, as we talked about in the movie, was a very successful Tin Pan Alley songwriter. And he was a Russian immigrant, came over and worked with different collaborators through his life. And so they grew up in that same house and in that exposure to the music and the theory of the music and everything else that they would garner from our grandfather, Al Sherman. But, you know, their life experiences were so different that made a really unusual collaboration for them, because they had the same basis of things, but they looked at the world differently.
They used to use the word stereoptic in the way they looked at the world, in that it came from a left and right channel, but mixed properly, it gave it a very rich sound. And I think that is the reason we're sitting here so many years after the songs they've written, talking about their music and talking about their work, is that it resonated because they came from unique but different and complementary points of view. Absolutely. And it comes through in songs, like every song, actually, but some more than others in a major way. And they stay with us.
And my dad never liked depressing projects or depressing things. He really didn't love that stuff. He said, you know, there's so much depression in the world. Let's bring happiness and light. And that was always his thing. And Dick's that way, too. So
they sure did.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's in there. I mean, they bottled it up in those, you know, when you listen to them, you're hearing them speak and sing to you.
Well, Jeff and Greg, after you got done with the film, did your parents get a chance to see it? What was their reaction if they did get to see it?
Well, again, it was different. My dad, who lives in Los Angeles, you know, we used to joke that he'd circle the edit bay and come back in, you know, every once in a while. Can I see another couple minutes?
Oh,
and he I got a new couple of pictures for you.
Oh, yeah, we'd say, do you have any pictures of you guys, like, hanging out together when you're kids? He'd come with shopping bags full of them, and it was like he was right there. It was like a funny comedy bit.
And we can't tell you how important that was for us to have a resource that was actually one of the subjects of the documentary. I was excited about it. I think when it was finally put together, and it took on a different emotion for my dad and a different perspective for him, because it wasn't just two guys sitting in a room darkly working at little different pieces, but it was actually something that other people had an emotional reaction to, his friends, his family, his people that he worked with. Suddenly it was a totally different thing for him, and it changed how I think he perceived the film, because it wasn't just a little movie. It suddenly became something much bigger for him.
And my dad, Bob, was living in London. He lived the last 10 years of his life in London and didn't really travel a whole lot, didn't come here except for my wedding, I think. maybe a couple of times. And so he would see it in different cuts in London, and I guess he was a little nervous about how we were portraying it at first, and then he came around. We interviewed him 8 times, and there was stuff he talked about. He said, I don't want to put that in there. But when he saw the finished film on the way back from that Annecy festival, I stopped in London, and we watched it together. And then he read every review. And he was like tearing up, and he said, "Thank you so much. This is just such a beautiful gift." And he was especially happy that we had also talked about Al, his father and Dick's father,
right.
And put him in his place in music history as well.
That's wonderful. Yeah, you have come from such a talented family. Your grandmother was a silent film actress, and just unbelievable. The talent. Yeah.
We had band leaders before that, and first chair clarinetists and violinists. Wow. Yeah, it goes back many generations, and it's going forward. Both Jeff and I have our own sets of Sherman Brothers. We both have 2 boys, and
everybody's musical.
Everybody's musical.
Oh, wow.
Everybody's talented, and we could brag about our kids too. But my oldest son is about to graduate USC as a hip-hop major because,
wow.
Yes, exactly. Second at USC, but he is a tremendously talented lyricist and rapper, and he really wants to pursue that as a career. And a lot of times people would say, well, maybe you should have a plan B. I'm telling him to go for it because it's in his blood. He loves it. He is so committed, and it's beautiful to see it continue.
And my son Alex Sherman, he's almost 25, and he just recorded his first album, 10 original songs, and he's a singer-songwriter. Labels are looking at it right now, and he's terrific. He's just so it's really kind of cool because you do see the genes coming to play. I guess it's pretty amazing.
That's
really
wonderful. Yeah, that's wonderful, and it's great that you guys are encouraging them and helping them, push them forward. So we want to switch gears a little bit. I mean, the documentary stands on its own. Obviously, it's just like I said, it's brilliantly done. Everybody needs to see it, but we want to find out a little bit about you guys. So our big question, one of our big questions was, what was that growing up with Richard and Robert Sherman? I mean, come on.
As like most people, we had 5 pianos in our house. So
wow,
that's like my house. Yeah, exactly.
We just have one.
Sure. Including, by the way, not to bring up anything too sore of a subject, but my grandfather Al, whom we've mentioned a few times, gave me an upright piano that still sits in my dad's house. Well, anytime you want it, son, it does sit in a very important place. I do need that piano, but if you ever want it,
Isn't that the piano he plays in the beginning of the movie?
Yes, it is. It's in
that little room.
We bookend the movie with my dad playing piano in the beginning and the end, and that's an interesting story too. But we're getting away from the documentary. But the point is, my house growing up, at any given point when we'd be sitting at dinner or whatever, my dad would just sort of mysteriously leave the conversation mentally and then physically run to one of the closest pianos and start working. He was working nonstop, and he was always, and continues to always be writing. He is working today. He's got several songs coming out in the new Jungle Book movie that he's reworked, and a couple of new ones. And he's constantly working. There's a sequel to Mary Poppins. He just wrote a couple songs for the parks, and his output is constant. Whether he's actually getting them produced or whatever, he is always writing. And that was what it was like. And plus, we had some real perks when we went to Disneyland together.
We'll get to that.
In my house, it was a little different. My dad was really, he was a Renaissance man, and music was one thing he did. He wrote poetry, he wrote short stories, he created all kinds of artwork, metal sculptures. Our every wall in our house was like an obsession of his was painting. So there were hundreds of paintings of his. I'm not kidding, all over the house, beautiful stuff. And he didn't really talk about it. He would come home from work, and I'd be doing my homework, and he'd throw me my baseball glove, and he'd say, "Let's go play catch." And I just had a regular dad. He really didn't. He kept all of his awards up in his bathroom till my mom built a room because she was tired of people saying, "Can you go up to your dad's bathroom and get the Oscar?" So she built that stuff. But he was very much, for him it was part of his life, but it didn't completely define him. I think the way it did with Dick. I mean,
and then it led to a little bit of their frustration because what we discovered and what we decided before we even started this film is that there's no wrong person. There's no finger pointing. It's two very different points of view. And for my uncle, it was like, look, yes, we do this, but I have other things I'd like to be able to do in my life. And for my dad, it was like, why would you want to do anything but this? This is it. This is all there is to it. And nobody's wrong in that situation. It's just two very different points of view. And it did cause them some tension and frustration. But that's basically a lot of what fueled their incredible output.
But the great thing was, they asked about like the unusual things in our household, which we didn't really talk about in the movie, but my dad would come home every day and they would do demos almost every day. They would write several songs every day at Disney. And Dad would come home and he had this stereo. My dad would always turn on the stereo starting at the highest volume. I'm surprised he didn't blow his speakers every time. This reminded me of Admiral Boom in Mary Poppins, how the piano would go off. Everybody would just jump and go, "Oh, Dad, somebody's got a demo." And so we'd go down. My little brother was too young. He wasn't born yet. But my two sisters and I would listen to these demos. And we'd, keep them, and we'd start doing little dance numbers with my dad's canes, and we heard everything first.
Oh,
so
wow.
we would kind of imagine what Jolly Holiday was, or It's a Small World, or whatever, and kind of create these little dance numbers and do them for my dad, and he'd just crack up about that.
Wow.
My dad did blow out several speakers.
And actually, we have you, Jeff, to thank for A Spoonful of Sugar. That is what a great story.
Yeah, I mean, passively I'm involved, but yes, it's in the movie we talk about it. But they'd written a song. They'd written all the songs for Mary Poppins, and they championed Julie Andrews coming out and being Mary Poppins. She came out. She heard all the songs, and there was one song. Their favorite song was called "Through the Eyes of Love," and she just didn't like it. It was a little too on the head for her. So she said, I like all of them, but that one I'm just not sure about. And they were really depressed because they'd really gone to bat for her. And here she kind of knocked out the song she liked. So they tried to come up with a catchphrase or something that like a "Stitch in Time saves 9" or something. Like trying to think of something. And it happened just that way. I came home. My dad was sitting in a dark room, mourning the loss of his favorite song for the movie. And he said, "How was your day?" And I said, well, I got the polio vaccine at school today, and I was notorious for pushing over that tray of booster shots and running out of the doctor.
Yes.
So he couldn't believe somebody gave me a shot at school, and I let him do it. I said, no. They took out a plastic spoon and put a sugar cube in and put the medicine in, and he ate it. And he looked at me, and he started tapping his hand on a table, and he said, and he kind of put his finger up. He was like instantly lost in thought. He went over and called Dick, and they went and wrote "A Spoonful of Sugar Helps the Medicine Go Down."
Wow.
Incredible. So yes, I'm somewhat involved, but I just happened to get a polio vaccine that day. So that's my little corner of their career there.
But we, inadvertently, our experiences and the way we lived fueled a lot of their ideas for songs, because a lot of times they were working in family entertainment. So there'd be a child, a boy, something like that, and they would channel Jeff or me, or if it was a girl, one of our sisters, to just get a perspective. So we inadvertently helped, but not quite as famously as that. And you think about it now, "Spoonful of Sugar Helps the Medicine Go Down" is a catchphrase, it's a
Jeopardy question. I've been a Jeopardy question twice.
It's not twice. "A Stitch in Time saves 9" or something like that, but they actually did, and now it's part of the lexicon.
But the interesting thing we found, really, we asked about the emotional content and all this. When Gregg and I were doing this, it was sort of like a beautiful mind. We had this wall of cards of all this stuff we'd shot, different topics, their early career, their this, their that. And so it was all up on the wall, and we were trying to figure out, how is this all going to come together? And one day I remember looking at the thing, and it was like, it kind of came out at me. I went, oh my God, I just realized this song was written when their parents were dying. This was when they went to work at Disney. They wrote, "Let's get together." They were hired as songwriters at Disney. "Let's get together. We'd make a really great team." All this stuff. And that became sort of the clue for us as to how to weave the whole story, which was their lives, their lives are reflected in these songs that everybody knows, and you just don't know it until you know more about them.
Growing up, when did you realize, I mean, because you're going to school, you're doing the kid thing, that your parents are the Sherman brothers? Do you have like an epiphany? Do other kids say, your parents are kind of a big deal?
Well, my experience was, my dad brought the Oscars the day after they won the Oscars on television for Poppins. But my dad, as I mentioned, he was sort of a bohemian and sort of really down to earth. He was not a Hollywood guy. He happened to have some Hollywood friends, but he had friends who weren't, and he just wasn't like that too much. So I kind of went, okay, well, it's my dad's job. And, then you go through that period where you're teased because your dad writes kiddie songs.
Oh.
But there was a moment for me where I really remember this came into play. They'd won the Oscars, and there's a picture of me at the Hollywood Bowl. It was my sister Tracy, my sister Lori, Dick, and my dad. And there was a daytime concert of music, and there was a section they were doing of Disney songs. So we're sitting in this box, and they're taking these publicity pictures of us and stuff, and I don't think too much about it. And just because my dad was that way, he just didn't make a big deal about it. And then during the concert, they played the song, a bunch of the songs from Poppins. And the concert wasn't over, but the conductor said, and the two gentlemen who wrote those songs that you love are here today. And my dad and uncle stood up, and it was the end of the concert. They had more to play. Nobody cared. They flooded around us.
Oh,
and we were sworn. I mean, I have a picture just before that the LA Times took. And that was the moment just before I realized who my dad was. Because suddenly I realized, oh, he's like the Beatles. Wow, this is amazing. People were asking for my autograph.
That was, I had a slightly different epiphany. Mine was more, I had the same thing where I was teased, my kid, because I was a little boy, and they just wrote kiddie songs and kiddie music. And I kind of felt badly about that because I would get teased for it. And again, we grew up in a society in our hometown where everybody had a famous dad or something or whatever. So it wasn't that outstanding, at least in my mind, as a 8, 9, whatever year old, until Ringo Starr recorded "You're 16, You're Beautiful in Your Mind," and it became the #1 rock and roll song in the country, and it was the #1, and it was like suddenly now they're writing rock and roll, now they're now this is big, and of course it was a reboot of something Johnny Burnett had done in 1961, but now it was relevant again, and a Beatle had recorded it, so suddenly I felt pretty good, and it was like, yes, and that was my ridiculous 9-year-old epiphany of, yes, my dad is actually cool and writes.
Awesome. That is awesome. Did you guys did you ever get to meet Walt Disney?
We both did, only Jeff in a much more meaningful way. We have a few years between us, so mine was much less significant. I can tell you, I went to my dad's office one day, and my dad introduced me to Walt, and Walt and I held hands, and I held his finger, actually went up the elevator. He took me to his office. He plopped me on his desk and showed me all his fantastic little things on the desk that I got to play with while my dad went to work. And I said something to him like, so this is where you work for my dad? And he laughed, and my dad did not laugh at that. And I was all of about 2 or 3 years old in a sailor suit. And Jeff used to tease me when we were making movies, like, you should really tell that story. And then we just cut to you now, but just bursting out of a 3-year-old sailor suit would be a good thing. But that was really the significant part of that. And because Walt died shortly thereafter, and my dad used to every month, every week, remind me, remember you met that man, remember that day, remember you did this. And to this day, I have fuzzy little memories of spending that time with him and how lovely he was to me. And it is still a memory in my life because my dad kept it alive at such an early age for me.
My experience was my dad would always tell us the stories of Mary Poppins. He read the first book to me and my sister Lori, and he told me about all these amazing things that were going on at the studio and the magic and and I'd gone to the studio a bunch with them because mostly, if the secret were known, I loved the tuna sandwiches at the studio. And, but he, one day he took me out of school and he said, I want to take you over to the studio. So we went over, it was a weekday, and he took me around to the various stages. Now, every stage at Disney Studios was devoted to Poppins. So on stage 2, where I eventually went and shot the series Boy Meets World, I was one of the producers on that show, writers. But stage 2, the big stage, was Cherry Tree Lane, and different ones had different things. They had the rooftops of London and the merry-go-round against a green screen, and so I was taken around, but it didn't really seem magical to me, because when you're a kid and you've been told all this stuff by this man who was so eloquent at explaining, all the magic, it was a little disappointing, to be honest. So we walked into the commissary, and I'm looking forward to my tuna sandwich, and Walt Disney walked in with 2 guys who looked like bankers. They were kind of businessmen. And I'd met him a few times, sort of in passing and stuff, but he always remembered everybody's name. And he said, "Jeff, I understand you were at the studio today, here looking around at our sound stages for Mary Poppins. What do you think of it all?" And I'm holding my dad's hand, and I said, "Well, I guess they're okay." And my dad's hand went limp, and when you said something wrong, but you don't know what, and I'm scared now. Disney got this sort of look on his face, and he knelt down next to me, and he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I don't know." And he said, "You come with me." And I thought I was in trouble. The guy who owned Disneyland was now scolding me. And I thought I was going to get kicked out of the studio. But he walked me back over to the soundstage nearby, which housed the rooftops of London. And there were guys hammering and all this stuff. He turned on the work lights. And he said, "Look, what do you mean? What's going on?" I said, "Well, I just don't think anybody's going to believe it." And he said, "Jeff," he said, "I've had the greatest artist in the world recreate exactly what the rooftops of London look like. This is exactly what it's going to look like." I said, "Well, but it's not off the ground, and it's like just sitting here on the ground, and over." And he said, "Oh," and he made his hands into when you do like a movie camera frame,
Right, yeah.
and he put it down in front of me, and he said, "This is what the camera's going to see. They're not going to know that this is on the ground, and we're not in England. They're not going to know that. That's called movie magic, and you can never tell your friends." And then he took me back to lunch, and I think my dad was having a scotch.
I'll bet he was.
that really opened my eyes to the whole thing. I started using my dad's Super 8 camera and making movies of my own, and so that's what I do now. That was there were 2 people in my life that, beyond my dad and some of his friends, but there was Walt Disney and George Lucas were the two people that got me into film, really.
Right.
They don't know it.
Well, we got to get you introduced to George Lucas. Now he's sort of in the Disney
Yes, please.
realm.
We actually premiered in the George Lucas Theater our film, our documentary. It was in the George Lucas Theater, which is in the Presidio in San Francisco. And so there was a giant Darth Vader thing there. It was one of the most thrilling experiences of our lives.
Well, it was cool for me because it just a shortcut a little bit. But when I was an English major at Berkeley, and I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with my major. I didn't know what I was going to do. I kind of wanted to be a songwriter, just didn't know. And so my roommate, my sophomore year, came and ran into the house. He goes, "Come on, I got you a ticket." I said, "For what?" He goes, "There's this movie. You're going to come with me right now. It starts, this huge orchestra plays and a rocket ship flies over your head." And we ran out and we went and saw Star. He saw it twice that night. I saw it again at a midnight show. And I went, "I'm going to go into film. This is amazing." So when we were told that the movie was premiering at George Lucas's theater, and then our after party was at the still unopened Disney Family Museum up there. Diane Disney had arranged for a room to be finished so that we could have our party in there because it meant so much to her too.
How cool.
And I went, this is the weirdest turnaround of things, that George Lucas and Walt Disney would somehow be involved in this. It was pretty cool.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, that is very cool.
Stars are aligning. That's awesome.
Yeah, it happens. There's something going on. We'll all figure it out one day.
Exactly.
There's these coincidences that aren't coincidences, but I don't know what that is yet.
Neither. Now, I don't know when the pre-production started, but were either of your fathers involved in anything with Saving Mr. Banks?
Well, yes. Jeff and I had some ideas of doing other things, and so did Disney. Ben Stiller was one of our exec producers, and he very much wanted to play my Uncle Bob, and he wanted his good friend Robert Downey to play my dad, and Disney was all about doing that. And but before that, Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick had both expressed interest in playing them on Broadway. And so Jeff and I were trying to see if that could fly, and we were developing something for that. But those projects were scuttled because of a variety of reasons. The people that were handling the theatrical production caught wind that it wasn't going to fly, and they had a blacklisted script because it showed the likeness of Walt Disney. And they thought if they made Walt's relationship to the Sherman Brothers the spine of the movie, that they'd have a really good shot at selling it, because there was an appetite now for showing Walt Disney. So the writer of Saving Mr. Banks called up my dad and got a lot of those scenes that are between the Sherman Brothers and Walt, and the Sherman Brothers and Pamela Travers, to be a consultant and all that. And so he was front and center as a consultant.
And they used our film also that nobody really knew that story of really the evolution of Poppins, the core of Saving Mr. Banks. And so they used our film, that section, as sort of research for them, and killed our movie.
Oh, no. Wow.
It's all right.
It's Hollywood. It happens.
Did the movie Saving Mr. Banks, did that bring a renewed attention to your dad's music and all of that?
I'm sure it did. Most people think that Walt Disney either made up the songs or Dick Van Dyke and Julie Andrews did. I mean, that's just what people think. They don't, there are certain songwriters, Elton John and Marvin Hamlish and different people like that, they get their names out there, but our dads are very humble about it, and they always felt the work spoke for itself. So consequently, nobody really knew they were connected. So there was that between our movie and Saving Mr. Banks. People found out that these two guys, these two brothers, had written these songs, and I wish that the movie had dealt more with the reality of what happened in real life, because it was a much more compelling story. But for the sake of telling a biopic, whatever, they sort of telescoped a few things and stuff, but it did bring renewed attention to them. And
yet to this day, I can go on It's a Small World ride, which I've done since I was a little kid, and sit there, and there's a couple of people that sit above you that release the boat into the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I ask, excuse me, do you know who wrote this song? And I get everything from the Wright brothers to I'm not making this up. Never once in all the years, no matter which park I'm at in Disney World or Disneyland, the people that actually work and listen to that song all day long have no idea who wrote it. So, Yes, it might have done some wonderful things for people that connected the Sherman Brothers to their music, Saving Mr. Banks, but they still don't know who wrote It's a Small World on the Ride.
Well, they had an unusual career, because I think it was just their feeling about it. They never had an agent. They had a manager who was, basically fielding calls for them, but they weren't, typical Hollywood aggressive songwriters. They were artists, and people found that they were very successful. It doesn't happen a whole lot,
Right. So working for Walt Disney. They were just happy to be working for Walt Disney.
They loved it, and they loved Walt. They loved the organization. And after Walt died, as we said in the movie, they were such sort of favorite guys over there that there was a backlash at them for a little while at the studio, and they went off and did other projects. But then were welcomed back by the Dick Cook regime, I think, and around there. And they did a bunch of stuff. They did the Tigger movie. They started writing songs for the parks again. And so that was nice. They were appreciated. And, this really woke up the studio again and gave them a lot of respect within the studio as well, too.
Did in your production for the movie, did Disney give you access to the archives? Do the Sherman Brothers have their own annex in the Disney archives?
Well, I don't know if they have their own annex, but I got to tell you, they were so good to us at the Disney studios in terms of allowing us access to pretty much whatever we needed and wanted. It was a blessing and a curse, because there's such an overwhelming output of material, and we had to synthesize and process all of it and figure out what songs and what stories and what photos and what clips actually tell a narrative that we can do in 90 minutes. They had a 60-year career. We had to boil it down and tell a story.
500 songs released and 35 movies. We watched everything, listened to everything. We listened to the entire Painful Mrs. Travers tapes, which are just painful to listen to.
Oh, wow.
We used it in our film, and they used it again in Saving Mr. Banks at the end of the end credits.
Right.
It's the most painful thing to sit through, because you just sit there and they're just biting their tongues. They just want this woman to give them permission.
Right,
And she's so abusive, it's horrible. They made her very nice in the movie comparatively.
Right. Yeah. How's it? I mean, you just said 500 songs, over 500 songs. You have to hear their music just about everywhere you go. What's that feel like when you hear one of your dad's songs or even your grandfather's songs, for that matter?
I'll tell you, I had an experience this week. The most recent episode of Criminal Minds, there was some detestable, murdering, horrible person and at the very end credits of Criminal Minds, "Hushabye Mountain" from Chitty Chitty Bang.
Oh, wow.
And it's always flattering. It's always lovely. I think that it's fascinating with the output that they did. That "Hushabye Mountain" was written in 1967, but here in 2015, 2016, they decided to put that particular piece of music at the end of this thing. Regardless of the subject matter, it just shows you the kind of lasting and beautiful output that they did, that it just goes on forever. Right. And that's how I feel like there are certain things that are written in a time capsule, and you're saying that's a 50s song or a 60s song. Their songs, a lot of their songs are timeless. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, when I hear something like that and see something like that, and I see how they're still kept alive in the zeitgeist of popular culture, it allows me to sort of take in just the kind of output that they really gave the world.
Yeah, the other thing is too, it's part of the zeitgeist. There's something for me, I guess, especially since my dad's now gone. I feel like he really does live on when I hear the songs. And my grandfather, I was very close with my grandfather. He taught me how to play piano, and I even named my older son Alex after him. It's Alex Robert Sherman. He got the best of all, and I guess that's why he's writing songs now. But when I hear those, and I hear "Feed the Birds," or I hear, some of the lovely messages that they wrote together, and particularly for me, I hear my dad speaking, and it was how he spoke in regular life, and his philosophies and all that, and he still touches people and he still communicates. And what's wonderful is they really wrote it, as Gregg said, it's timeless because it's just very simple and true. And it's not of any specific time or any specific place, but it's the human experience that they were so great at finding a way of not only just lyrically doing it, but with Dick's music, weaving it and making it part of something that stays with you even after you listen to the song.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's a moment in our documentary where my Uncle Bob says, "We didn't write kiddie songs. We wrote songs for kids." Mm-hmm. And what's true about that is they never talked down to children. They spoke to them, and I think that's true of how they talk to us as their parent. They didn't talk down to us. They assumed that we had a mind and a thought process, and they gave us credit for understanding these things. And that's why the songs can take on a different meaning as you get older and as you evolve. In a movie like Mary Poppins, for instance, when you see it as a teenager versus as a little kid versus as an adult with your own children, it consistently takes on a different meaning because those songs had dimension to them.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Guys, we touched on a little bit ago that when you go to the parks, you catch your dad's music there, which just has to be incredible.
It is.
When your fathers got their windows on Main Street, was that a exciting time? Did you go to that?
I thought they did such a beautiful job. Yeah, we were both there, and it was a really neat, wonderful show and experience. They put a lot of time and effort into making that experience wonderful, not just for, I guess they filmed it, and I guess you can find it online somewhere. Mm-hmm. But they really put a lot of time and effort into really giving them their due. And what was fascinating about that is that they're the only songwriters on Main Street on a window. Those windows are really for people that they said built the park. And quite honestly, they felt they would take exception to the literal version of that because they felt as though our dads did help build that park and gave them a window. They also were the only ever, to this day, contracted songwriters to ever work for the Walt Disney Company. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, their experience is really interesting. The reason Disney, I think, probably part of the reason he really liked them was they came out of the Vine Street era, which was when the music business had moved to Hollywood. And what songwriters would do at the time, they were song pluggers. And you'd hear on the street that, somebody needed a novelty song, something funny, or somebody needed a love song about some, and they would go and they'd write these things. They could write anything. And then when, as we showed in the documentary, they started writing songs for Annette Funicello through a series of things. But Annette would have different kind of themes to her album, like Hawaiianette, Italianette. They could write. My dad. It was funny listening to the way he would write the lyrics and try to make them sound like they were really Italian. or really Hawaiian or whatever, because he didn't. My dad's way of speaking when we went to Europe to people was if you spoke loudly and slowly, they would understand you. So sometimes they were a little funny to listen to in retrospect, but they could really write anything. So Disney had all these things going on at the same time. He had Disneyland coming up, so he needed a song for the Tiki Room. They could write that. They could write, they could write any kind of a song you needed. And that's why I think they were just great utility guys, and they really got into the story of songs. They didn't just write a song; they would get into the whole concept. Their way of writing was they came up with the idea, the sort of the twist for the song, and then they would start writing the music and the lyrics. So that always came first.
And what's also fascinating for them, and neither one of them had any moment where they didn't fully appreciate the opportunity that they had. This was Walt Disney before we think of Walt Disney Company as this behemoth conglomerate. In 1960, when they went to work there, he had just opened Disneyland. He had his weekly TV show, and he had ideas to do bigger movies. Walt always wanted to be part of like the Warner Brothers Paramount club. He wanted to be one of the big players, the MGM club. And it wasn't really until Mary Poppins that he became a major player in the movie thing. Otherwise, he was just a guy that was off in the Tules of Burbank writing cartoon movies and nature films. Mm-hmm. He was not considered a filmmaker until Mary Poppins. And that's really what turned his world around. So there our dads were front and center when opportunity was boundless in terms of all the different aspects they could do. And the story songs, even as simple as the Tiki Room, it was Walt's foray into audio animatronic technology. And they went in, there was these things clacking and birds and flowers, and they said, "What is this?" And Walt says, "You're going to write a song about it. And explain what's going on here. And I need it yesterday." And so they basically were given the opportunity of a lifetime, of many lifetimes, because I don't know that there'll be another entrepreneur quite like Walt Disney that had so many different avenues at that particular moment, and they were the right guys at the right time to be able to do all that.
They could express what he would tell them.
Right.
He would give them hints, and he really collaborated with them quite a bit. They were right down the hall from him at Disney Studios.
Not by accident. He had them situated, a stone's throw from his own office.
Right. Well, I think back and think, okay, if your fathers hadn't have done what they had done for the Disney company, where would the Disney company be now? And I just don't see anybody being able to fill the shoes that your fathers did in the music that they provided for all of us that are huge Disney fans. So we only got a couple of more questions. We could talk to you guys for hours. I know you guys are busy, and we appreciate you sticking around for us. But getting back to the documentary, what is it you want people to get out of the documentary when they watch it?
Well, we thought about this a lot, the themes and the whatever. And, it's what we talked about was, it's not unusual for brothers to fight. And we didn't want to really stress that the animosity, it really isn't about that. It's not unusual for siblings to fight, or for siblings in business especially to fight, or to have disagreements and conflict. But the magic of the Sherman brothers and what kept them there was this desire to make the world a better place, to take what they'd seen in life and turn it around and have people find the beautiful side of life. And so the miracle of the Sherman brothers is not, that they fought, but that they were able to do this and create these things over and over and over and over again, and things that last forever within that kind of context. And they lasted as writing partners for over 50 years. And the magic of that they were both driven to do that, and together, they really didn't write with other people too much, that's the magic of the Sherman brothers. And when you come away from the movie, what we were hoping is that people would take another listen to these songs that they know by heart. But really, when you listen to the lyrics and when you look at something like Feed the Birds and you learn about charity, or you learn the songs, what they're speaking to you about is family and love and understanding, forgiveness. You can almost tag one of those or more to almost every song they did. So when you listen to the Sherman Brothers songs, a lot of people think they're little silly kid songs, but if you really listen to them, you listen to It's a Small World, It's about world peace and understanding each other and getting beyond the differences. And, those messages are timeless, especially in these times where there's so much prejudice and hate and distrust. If people listen to these songs and really took them to heart, which we hope they will when they see the movie, and understand our dads and understand the souls that kind of brought these forward, that's what we hope people take away.
That's wonderful.
That's beautiful. All right, guys, we got to ask, because they only have a couple songs, but we have to ask, what is your single favorite Sherman Brothers song?
Go ahead, Greg.
Well, we both have a couple similar, and we've been asked this question once or twice.
I'm sure.
There are a few that resonate with me personally, and I think there are so many that really, at any given time, can be my favorite of that particular time. Mm-hmm. But there's a song from Tom Sawyer that Jeff and I both were told separately by our dads that I wrote that for you. Both our dads told us that.
It's a song called River Song from Tom Sawyer. It's the title song.
Yeah.
And I was in high school, going to Beverly Hills High School, which was right next to 20th Century Fox Studios, where my dad was doing all the recording, and my dad and uncle were doing all the recording with John Williams at the big sound stage there. And I would go, and I became friends with the producer, Arthur Jacobs, and he said, anytime you want to come over, he knew I was interested in film. He said, just come on over, you can see dailies, you can come to whatever you want. So I was able to, I would ride my bike around to the 20th Century Fox gate, and I would actually, the guard would wave me in on my bicycle, and I'd come in, and I went into the studio. And one day my dad said, come at lunchtime, I want you to come and hear something. So I went down. And of course, John Williams is conducting 120 musicians, the best musicians in Hollywood, and they're scoring River Song. And so they do that. And then Charlie Pride, the country singer, comes in, and Charlie sang the lyrics. And it's about watching a boy growing to a man. And at the time I was applying to colleges, and I was about to leave home. And so it was interesting. Arthur Jacobs gave me a Tom Sawyer shirt. He just had them made, and I put one on. And Charlie Pride finishes singing the song, and my dad turns to me with a tear in his eye, and he says, I wrote that for you.
Oh.
So that's always been a special song. And I know that Dick wrote it for Greg, too. It's a father speaking, looking at a kid who, you wanted to, I've gone through it with my own children, as Greg has. You want to keep them forever, but you know that they have to move on. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Tim and I both have sons, and we know that feeling as well. So.
Now if they just get out of here.
Well, stop costing us money. That's the bottom line right there, right?
Especially when they're in college.
Whether you're in college, okay. Yeah.
Well, we're going to let you guys go. Jeff and Gregg Sherman, the wonderful documentary, The Boys, the Sherman Brothers Story. Everybody out there in Looper Nation has got to get this movie. It is just brilliantly done, and we truly, truly appreciate the time that you've given us today, and more importantly, the history that you've given us in this documentary that will live on forever. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there it is, Tim. That is all I've got for the Sherman cousins. What an incredible, incredible interview that we had with them.
Oh, just totally fabulous. We can't thank Jeff and Greg enough for taking the time to come on the show.
It was wonderful. We had to break that up into 2 shows just because of the just awesome information that they gave us.
You have to let that content soak in too. I mean, that's some heavy duty, awesome stuff there.
We could have talked to them for hours and hours and hours
and hours.
The deluge. Anyway, Tim, where else can they listen? I'm flabbergasted by what we just did.
I'm starstruck.
So am I. Oh my goodness gracious. Go ahead, do your thing, Tim.
Hey, if you want to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter, ResortLoop Tim, on Facebook at Tim ResortLoop Scott, and I always have that website, ResortLoop.com.
I'm ResortLoop Bob on the Twitter and Instagram. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, rate us on iTunes, and what else should people do, Tim?
I think people should go ahead and share us on Facebook and Twitter. Get the word out. Spread the ResortLoop.com love.
That's right. Let's build Looper Nation.
Build it up, everybody. This has been the Gateway to the Magic.
See you, everybody.
Hey, Bob, it's that time of year again.
Absolutely. Everybody's getting ready for their next year's vacation planning. And what should folks do, Tim?
Contact Tyler over at People Mover Travel. January is going to be cruise time, is what they call wave season. Everybody's putting in their vacation at work, so you're going to know what days you need to take. So contact him. Get in early.
Absolutely, and make sure that's peoplemovertravel.com. Let them know that you heard of them from us in the drop-down menu Resort Loop.
That's right. You'll get the days you want at the hotel you want, and he's going to keep an eye out for the rest of the year for discounts right up until the day you leave for your vacation. That's peoplemovertravel.com.